Well, I saw you on Alex Jones, and I liked what you had to say and subscribe to your newsletter. But tell the people who have never met you before who you are.
Yeah, my name is Mike Yoder. I'm founder of Citizen AG, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. Essentially, since we didn't have a U.S. Attorney General, I decided maybe we'd do the job for him and actually enforce the laws that we have and also educate Americans on our rights. Because personally, I don't think that you actually can exercise any right if you don't know what your rights are in the first place. So that's what we mainly do, is focusing on education. And then recently we just partnered with James O'Keefe, and we're going to be doing a whistleblower initiative where we're going to try to fight to protect federal whistleblowers and then also prosecute claims on their behalves, so we can actually get rid of some of this corruption in our government.
That's very cool. I mean, there's the expression in French, which is nul n'est censé ignorer la loi, which in English is ignorance of the law is no excuse, but it's true. You are held liable if you don't know the law and break it, but it's difficult to enforce your rights if you don't know the law to enforce them. 31, practicing lawyer out of which states?
Currently, none. I am in timeout for 6 months.
Sorry, I didn't know if this is I didn't know, and is this touchy? You'll let me know. Timeout meaning what? A voluntary or forced timeout, Mike?
Involuntary sabbatical.
What happened? Can you talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Everyone's familiar with, lawfare. I'll leave it largely at that.
So it's a 6 months, we'll call it a sanction, but 6 months you're not allowed to practice, and then you can come back to the practice.
Yeah, refunding a woman out of the wrong bank account. It had nothing to do with taking money from clients. It was actually giving it back to them. But that was my cardinal issue.
It's show me the man and I'll show you the crime okay. It doesn't matter. It won't get into it further than that. But now, what state were you practicing in before, or go back to afterwards?
Licensed in state court wise, I only practice exclusively in federal court, but licensed in DC and Virginia. But I've had cases in 22 different states, so everywhere from Hawaii to Alaska, Florida to Massachusetts, Texas, everywhere in between pretty much. So all over federally. And then my two partners with our firm in the for-profit side, Yoder, Pearson, they practice all over the country as well.
Very cool. And what state are you in now, if I may ask? You're in
California.
You're in California. Have you had to evacuate? I
have not. I'm fortunately south of LA. So we're in good shape here, but it's terrible to see the devastation that is, largely in part resultant of incompetence and poor management and frankly, management of every aspect of what you're supposed to manage. But, my heart's with those people in LA, regardless of, political agenda or aisle or ideology. It's sad. It's just a blanket statement. It's just sad.
Where are you in California right now?
San Diego.
San Diego is 3 hours south of LA, 4 hours south?
It could be anywhere between 2 and 6,
depending on traffic.
But yeah.
Okay, very cool. And so you haven't seen, you're not firsthand seeing the fires or anything, but I know that you obviously have lots of people that up in the area.
Yeah, there's a lot of we actually represented the firefighters, a lot of LA firefighters a while ago. They're some of the nicest people I've ever met, and hope they're all safe. So we have a lot of friends in LA. We have a lot of connections in LA, and we've had personally friends that had to evacuate or flee their homes. So, it's as devastating as what people, if you're on the East Coast, wherever you may be, are seeing. It really is as bad as they're showing.
Okay, now getting to so you start a 501c3, the purpose of which is, what's the objective? And I want to get into the relationship with James O'Keefe as well. But so what's the 501c3 doing?
Yeah, so essentially what it came down to is the fact of when you go after defending rights or enforcing your constitutional protections that you have that are guaranteed to you in the United States, there's not a lot of money in that. There's not a lot of money when you're not suing over some sort of economic harm. You're suing to have your rights reinstated or rather to prevent the government from further violating the rights that you're guaranteed. That's not something that's necessarily a monetary gain or a lawsuit where you're seeking some sort of economic damages. The problem with that is that the litigation costs alone are exorbitant. And a lot of times what we saw was that people could have a perfect case that could change the landscape of an issue nationwide. Just like if people look at the, Obergefell v. Hodges, it took one case to legalize gay marriage on a federal level nationwide across the country. You look at one person with a set of facts can change the landscape for better or worse, but that person may not have the economic means to actually litigate that case. So what we decided to do was, if you're going to have large, nationwide impact issues of constitutional questions, we wanted to protect the rights of Americans across the board and actually enforce that by doing so through a nonprofit, because it is a public interest. We're trying to further the interests of the nation and society and protect those rights, but also educating them as well. So when you don't have the monetary ability to do that, that's why we went into the nonprofit space and opened Citizen AG to start doing that as well.
And so what cases are you involved in now? That I know that when you were on Jones, you were talking about, oh geez, it was COVID. You'll refresh my memory on it. But what cases are you involved in now that are newsworthy and noteworthy?
So right now we were involved. We just got off the election integrity fund. We ended up identifying and preventing 1.5 million voters that were ineligible voters that were still on the registration lists in Arizona and Pennsylvania from being able to be used for fraud. We forced the state of Arizona to turn over their entire voter databases, as well as we identified 277,000 voters in Pennsylvania that should have been removed from the rolls and were not, and just actually were able to get a written admission from the Pennsylvania Secretary of State admitting that they failed to comply with the National Voter Registration Act in terms of their list maintenance provisions. So we're not just dropping the case. We didn't do it for, partisan reasons. We believe that everyone's fundamental right to vote applies both in regard to preventing vote dilution, as well as ensuring that people who are eligible to vote are able to cast their ballots as they so choose. So we're still involved in those two cases. And then we also found another case we filed in Wisconsin that was dealing with a lot of the source of voter fraud. This through nonprofits that claim to help with list maintenance accuracy, but they add tenfold the number of voters to the list that they remove, and they're actually less accurate than the states that don't, partake in this nonprofit's services, so to speak.
Okay, very interesting. And now you're based in California now. You live there?
Yep.
You were following, because there's a lot of parallels to draw between what's going on in California, Lahaina. I don't know what the status is of North Carolina in terms of eminent domain, but you were intimately following what was going on in Lahaina at the time. You've been following up on that?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. We essentially went out and working with a local Hawaiian lawyer. We ended up, there was a gentleman that was criminally charged for taking a photograph on public property. He was on side of a public roadway. And I mean, that's as blatant of a First Amendment violation as you get. And we initiated a lawsuit. It ended up resulting in his charges being completely dropped as soon as we, initiated the litigation. And the whole gist of it was protecting the fundamental First Amendment rights of free speech and petitioning the government, freedom of expression. And the issue here was the fact that under Hawaiian law, the state law allowed the governor to unilaterally suspend, quote, any law that he deemed necessary to further the interests of mitigating the public health emergency or state of emergency,
That's
which is a codified dictatorship where you're eligible to unilaterally suspend any law that you so choose. And apparently that included the First Amendment, but under what's called the Supremacy Clause, that's, a bunch of, I obviously know that you're aware of the law and,
yeah, but
do educated, but
for the purposes of the audience, Supremacy Clause, I don't want to screw it up, but summarize. I mean, okay, sorry, explain what it is.
Essentially, the Supremacy Clause is saying that federal law trumps state law. So, if the teacher tells the kid that they can't do something, kid can't do it. If the principal tells the teachers that they can't do something, the principal wins. If the superintendent tells the principals they can't do something, superintendent wins. So it's a hierarchy of laws under the Supremacy Clause where the Constitution reigns supreme.
The Constitution is the law of the land, period, and no state can violate the Constitution
without their law being unconstitutional. They can't conflict with one another. So that's what the Supremacy Clause says. If there's a conflict where they butt between each other, federal law wins, or Constitution wins over federal law, or obviously the Constitution wins over state law too.
It's funny, in Canada, which is where I'm from, we have our Charter of Rights Constitution, and then you have a provision of the Charter of Rights that says that provinces can violate the Charter of Rights, certain charter rights, if they do so specifically in the law, but there are certain ones that they can't, but other ones that they can. So they can violate language laws, mobility rights, whatever. If the provision of law specifically says that they can do it, they have a time frame within which they can do it. So, but also our charter says every right in here is guaranteed, except in as much as can be compromised in a free and democratic society, which means that you can get locked in your house for 5.5 months under curfew for a virus.
Well, that might have to give way if you guys become the 51st state. It's going to be confusing for you as a lawyer.
It's not. It's not going to happen. I've been doing the rounds this week to explaining what I think is going on with that. But so you got the charges dropped in that case. Did you? Let me ask a stupid question. Did you get to go to Hawaii?
Oh yeah, we went out to Hawaii for that, and that was probably gonna be my last time in Hawaii. So
do I dare ask why?
I mean, more you sue the government, and then you get a bar complaint. But interestingly enough, the complaining party was the government itself. So.
I know how it goes, by the way. And I know how it goes when they start to like audit the small guys. Because like we when I was a practicing lawyer, that we would magically get audited like twice in 7 years, where some big firms, they either don't get audited that often, but they certainly have less of a difficulty in addressing an audit because it's a less drain on their resources. But like when they literally, tally if interest accrues in a trust account and it doesn't balance to the penny, these become issues, and they exist as an administrative body to make issues of the procedure itself. But anybody who's ever practiced knows the retribution that comes along with being politically unpopular. Anyway, Hawaii's nice, but we got good, nice mountains up in the mainland anyhow. But did you go visit the disaster site in Lahaina?
Yeah, we did. It was shocking. I mean, that was one of the first things that James and I worked on together. James O'Keefe and I went out there just, reporting on what was going on. We obviously knew that there was a lot of malfeasance going on. There were contradictory statements from, state officials, from National Guard, from police. Nobody understood what was going on. And, I saw it from the outset. It was exactly what it ultimately ended up being, which was a land grab. And you see in the United States, there's something called the takings clause, which, as a preliminary matter, it shocks me that, most people don't realize you technically never really own anything, no matter what. You could have the deed to the soil beneath your feet or the house or the land, or you could have, but if you don't pay taxes on it, what do? They take it. If you pay taxes on it, what are you doing? You're renting it. So theoretically, if you look at it in that concept, you never actually technically own anything. And even if you do comply with that, the government can still take privately owned land. If you pay for it, you own it, it's beneath your feet, you pay your taxes, you do everything the way you're supposed to. If the government deems that they're going to be using that land for the public benefit and they provide what's called just compensation. Now, that term is undefined. What is deemed to be just is another way of saying fair market value. Well,
or municipal evaluation, which is always well below fair market value.
Or when you have to agree upon it, such as when you get an example where, let's say, for example, you work 8 months out of the year, and then in Hawaii, they wait until the next, fiscal year, and then they threaten you with not paying your taxes. But then if let's say we'll give you 700, if you either owe us tax money, but you can't pay it because you lost everything in a fire and you didn't work the last 4 months of the year and you're just trying to get your life back together. So if you don't pay your taxes, then they, we'll drop any criminal charge if you agree to, give us your land in exchange. And that if you agree to that, then obviously a contract in the United States that could serve as the basis of what's considered just compensation. And it's not the first time this has happened. They've done it previously in Hawaii. They did it to build a golf course. And then you also see that happening. And my fear is that that's what potentially could be happening in LA. I hope not. But, these smart cities, that's something that they talk about a lot, where they want to, take the land and turn it into government ran housing complexes or whatever that may be. And, I'm not going to speculate and opine as to why the fires happened in LA. I don't have any evidence on it, so I'm not going to, theorize on it, but it is something that has happened. It's a real danger and it's a real threat. And, sadly, it's happened recently.
Yeah, I'm just trying to look to see what the number of now homeless are going to be as a result of these fires. Grok is saying posts on X suggest varying numbers. Thousands are homeless due to the fires, with an estimate from specific posts mentioning figures like 30,000 becoming homeless and another exaggerating to 1 million. But like it is wild, because there's going to be nothing but the lots, the plot of land left after this, whether or not it's going to be deemed a disaster that's going to require federal relief. When it came to Lahaina, East Palestine, North Carolina, and now LA, a lot of people talk about eminent domain and the government declaring it something of a national or national disaster, that the feds have to come in and appropriate the land to clean it. I very summarily looked into it, but do you have any knowledge on the procedure or whether or not that's a feasible or reasonable possibility?
So to answer the latter question, yes, I know and believe that it is a reasonable possibility of actually happening. In terms of the procedural aspect as to how you actually go through the logistical process behind it, that I'm not aware of. That I'm not a California attorney, so I couldn't. I don't want to opine on some sort of laws to in a state I'm not licensed, but I mean, each state's eminent domain proceedings are different. But yeah, I mean, it is a very real possibility, and a lot of it's done under the guise of like, we're going to take the land under control to help it and rebuild. But sure, that sounds great, but what happens after it's rebuilt? Does it go back to the landowner, or and if you're going to cut a budget to the point where you don't even have water and fire hydrants flowing, I find it hard to believe that you're going to invest in ameliorating burnt property and then just hand it back over to the rightful owners. It sounds like it should be happening, but it also sounds too good to be true. And, I hate to be pessimistic about it, but I just don't trust anything until it actually happens.
What has ended up happening in Lahaina? We haven't heard much talk about it. Nothing's been rebuilt. Has the land been claimed or reclaimed by the government?
Some of it. They've also included zoning ordinances in a lot of places where, for example, people that didn't want to agree to certain provisions or taking the compensation that was offered to them, they've instituted zoning ordinances where you have to have, 17 feet between each house or something of that sort, where it's an impossible compliance mechanism where you can't be in compliance with the new zoning codes. And, it's a squeeze. I mean, Lahaina has some of the most valuable real estate in the entire world. And it was largely a lower income demographic that lived there. It's historic. It's from the Kingdom of Hawaii prior to it becoming a state, and so the people there are incredible. But it's unfortunately part of what happens when the government wants something, the government takes it.
It's amazing. Okay, and now, so James O'Keefe partnership. What are you guys working on together now?
So I mean, he released that movie, The Line in the Sand. I don't know if you saw that, dealing with the immigration. So we're representing, with the whistleblowers in that film, some of the Zach Apotheker. We're also working with a female whistleblower, Kelsey Goodman, who was in North Carolina. We also have someone from government services that had contracts showing the profitable entity that exists surrounding the trafficking of children and illegal aliens. And we also have a few other whistleblowers that we're working with. And essentially the whole point of what we're trying to do is people know that corruption is real. People that work in the government know that it exists, but so many of them are too afraid to come forward, and it's justified because look what happens when you speak out, when you do the right thing. It's a top-down, fear-driven leadership style within our government, especially the federal government, where if you speak out, they crush you. They retaliate against you, and people shouldn't be afraid to speak the truth. So James and I decided, instead of just exposing their stories, we need to actually do something about it. They need to be defended, not only in terms of them, facing retaliation or termination or whatever it may be, but also it needs to go further where we actually enforce the laws and actually make sure that those who violate them are held accountable. Because the whistleblower should not be investigated for blowing the whistle. The claims that the whistleblowers bring forward are what should be the focus of any sort of investigation thereafter. And that just doesn't happen.
I watched the documentary. I actually had Zach on as well, at least once. The human trafficking element of this. Were you in the documentary, like physically? Because I don't.
Oh no, absolutely not. James is insane. I watched that and I was like, you are a brave man. I'll leave it at that. I was just
brave. Brave is what non-family members would say. Stupid is probably what his family members would say. What are you doing? Craziness. Him being on that train, going through the train that's part of the caravan, on a train with migrants, and then having to deal with corrupt Mexican police. I would obviously never in a million years. He's nuts. But the human trafficking side of that, where we are now hearing the numbers of missing children. We're seeing the stories are now coming out a little bit more of unaccompanied kids hitting the border, being dumped off by human traffickers with nothing but a telephone number and an address. And then there's the element of the corruption once they get into the American side. It's a story not really told all that often. I mean, can you go into the details as to what you guys know, what you've been able to uncover thus far?
I mean, mostly of what we've seen has been in, it was a lot of it was included in the movie, but we also just have seen there are contracts where that facilitate the economic industry of trafficking. And we know that the border being wide open is a profitable business. I mean, that's something that's made readily apparent within the movie. And then you also see on top of that the impact that it had on voting. I mean, so it's everything that's done is there's not just necessarily one purpose for a lot of it. There's more. They're multifaceted. They have different reasons for why they do what they do. But the influx of the crime, the influx of the just across the border, no pun intended, it's just widespread. And the trafficking, you seeing them come into the country, they're having, contingencies placed on if you have to register to vote to get your food stamps and you get your debit cards and get your free phones and so on and so forth. We saw this, throughout the administration, but it just ramped up towards I'd say the last few years it picked up, more significantly. But it's an influx, and they veil it under the guise of refugees. But we have asylum processes, we have refugee processes, and they try to blur the lines by conflating illegal immigration with immigration and saying that anyone who opposes illegal immigration is somehow, racist or xenophobic or whatever it may be, or they have issues with where you're from. And that's not the case. It's just there are proper mechanisms that I would agree do need to be revamped in certain ways for how to immigrate here legally, and it needs to be done more efficiently. But there is a legal way to do it, and there's an illegal way to do it. And that's really what it comes down to. And the flux across the border, the trafficking, the dangers, the fentanyl that's overpouring the lines, and then the children that are being trafficked is a massive, massive problem. And at the end of the day, I don't think that protecting children should be, or frankly, I am still optimistic that it's not a partisan issue.
It is. Well, the thing is, they're not unaware of it. I go down very dirty, dark rabbit holes. I mean, I'm looking at the stats now. According to data from 2020, there were 365,000 missing person records filed for juveniles between 0 and 17. Okay, the numbers. I'm trying to think. I want to get more recent. I don't know what the number is now. Where it's tens of thousands that go missing yearly when they once they cross the border or that are unaccounted for. And I say it's not a problem that they're unaware of it. It's not a problem they can't solve. I have a bad feeling that it's a problem of which they are complicit. They're a party for, the dirtiest and darkest of potential reasons. So yeah, it shouldn't be a partisan issue, but I think the system itself is complicit in what's going on for whatever the reason, financial or other.
A lot of it, they don't even know why they're doing it. A lot of people just do what they're told, and they don't particularly question. I mean, we've seen critical thinking just hit an all-time abysmal low. It's essentially just, do as I say, don't ask questions, and people just fall in line with that. And we've lost the ability to critically think about the questions, just our simple basic questions like, why are we doing what we're doing? Is this something that's a good thing? Is this something that's moral? Is this something that's furthering the people of this country? People don't ask those questions anymore.